today I wanted to talk to you guys about James 3. And actually, as I was preparing for this message and I was trying to figure out where I was going with this message, I had this last week and I was so exhausted from kids camp and I was like totally down on Monday and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to spend today, and I was reading. And I ended up reading a whole bunch of really fascinating things. Somehow I got onto the subject of reading about chickens. I don't know why I got onto the subject of reading about chickens. I don't get why I'm reading about chickens, but it was fascinating and I couldn't stop reading about chickens. I started reading about chickens, and there's actually this thing called chicken hypnosis. Did you know about this? Oh, it's a life changer. Yeah, see, I started reading about chicken hypnosis. Now, it's this whole science thing, and scientists aren't exactly sure why this works, but what chicken hypnosis is this magnetic hypnosis. What it is if you want a chicken to just basically stay, right? Sit, stay, be like a dog, right? So if you want a chicken to stay and lay down and be totally hypnotized, all you got to do is you put a chicken's face to the dirt, you put them to where they can see nothing else in front of them, and you draw a line in the sand right in front of them, and it hypnotizes the chicken. All of a sudden, the chicken goes limp, it becomes hypnotized. The chicken cannot see anything else except for that line. No matter what, it only looks at the line. The world can be on fire next to it. There could be wolves in the wings. There could be things coming up to it, but all the chicken sees is what's in front of him. It's that line. Apparently, some farmer had figured this out, and it was this fascinating thing where the farmer figured it out because one of the chickens was actually going in the pen, and the chicken kept like scrubbing his butt up against the dirt, and it made a line, and all the chickens behind the other chicken's butt started going psh, psh, hypnotized, and they just kept looking at the line, and scientists are like, why does this happen? This is weird. But apparently, it's a thing. Chicken hypnosis, it's a thing. Seriously, you guys can go home and watch YouTube videos on it. I will admit, I spent way too much time this last week watching videos of chickens getting hypnotized. It was fascinating. But as I was watching one of those videos, and I started watching one of those videos of chickens being hypnotized by a line in front of them, that they couldn't see anything else except for what was in front of them, I started to be reminded of us, that we're kind of like that. We are kind of like that. That is kind of something that we do kind of get hypnotized by what's in front of us. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably looking at me and you're thinking, you calling me chicken boy? No, I'm not calling you chicken. I'm just saying we are kind of like that, where we get so much in tunnel vision that when we get into this line and we have a line that's drawn in front of us in the sand, that we follow that line, that we can't go away from that line, that we don't look at what's to the side of us. We may not see what God is doing to the left or to the right. We may not see what's happening all around us, but we get so focused on the line that was drawn in front of us that we just continue on that line. Started to think that's kind of like us. And that's kind of like what was going on and what was happening in James's time in James chapter 3. As we go through James chapter 3 today, that's kind of like what was happening. That's the background of what was going on in James's time. Now I'm going to tell you, as we go into James chapter 3, and as we take a look at this, and we take a look at this today, I will tell you that James chapter 3 is actually filled with so many verses that are the most known verses ever. Like everybody knows the James chapter 3 verses. They are some of the most preached verses out there. Tons and tons of preachers everywhere will use the James chapter 3 verses, and they will use different ones because it seems like there's so many different subjects that are in there when there really isn't. But this seems like there's so many different subjects that we can all preach on different things. I will tell you, politicians quote from James chapter 3 sometimes the most. I will tell you that people know James chapter 3. And when you go home today, I will tell you, read James chapter 3, and I bet you as you read through it, you'll go, oh, I know that one. Oh, I know that one. Oh, I know that one. I know that one too. Because there are so many different recognizable verses that are inside James chapter 3. But today I want to do something a little bit different. Today, I want to talk about James chapter 3, maybe not in a way that you might have heard before, in a way that you haven't been hearing before, you've never known before. Today, I want to talk about James chapter 3 in the historical and cultural context. And then what does that mean for us today? How does that actually impact us today? And it's a different way of looking at James. So before we get into it, let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for being with us. We thank you so much for guiding us. We thank you so much, Jesus, that you are with us in all things. We are also especially thankful for those fans in the back. And we love you, Jesus. Put your words in our hearts and our minds today. Amen. Amen. I will tell you guys, for real, I was back there as I'm doing worship, and that fan would blow past me like every now and again. I'd go, oh, it's a miracle. Oh, it's gone again. Oh, it's a miracle. It gets hot. So I'll tell you guys, here's James. So in James chapter 3, it starts off with a bang. It starts off with a bang. From the very, very first sentence, it starts off with a bang. It starts off in a big way. Now, one of the things that I have to remind you guys is James is writing this letter, and it is a letter. So he's writing this letter, and he's got this big letter, and he's writing it to a specific people. He wrote it, it says in James chapter 1, it says to the 12 tribes of Israel that are dispersed, that are scattered. They're all around. Now, James, he's writing this as a letter. And when you write a letter, you don't write a letter like, okay, well, I'm going to write this verse and this chapter and this letter and this verse in this chapter, right? No, the whole thing actually flows together. We only put verses and chapters in there so pastors like me can tell you, hey, you should go read this thing right over here, and here's how you find it. It's over here in this chapter and verse. And then you guys all go home, and every time we tell you to read something in the Bible, you all do. It's a miracle. That's a joke. I know not everybody does. That's okay. Yeah, see, okay, Marcus got it. There we go. So here's the thing. We have James, and he's writing this letter, and he's writing the letter to the 12 tribes that are scattered, to the people of Israel that are scattered all around. So now he's out here, and he starts us off with a bang. He starts us off in a big way. I will tell you, though, that the very first sentence of James kind of feels a little out of place. It feels a little out of place. It feels a little wonky. It feels a little bit kind of like something different because it doesn't really match the sentences that came before it in chapter 2. And it doesn't really match the sentences that come after it. And this has given a lot of confusion to a lot of people. The first part of the letter the first part of the chapter starts off with this. My friends, not many of you should become teachers. As you know, we teachers will be judged with greater strictness than others. Seems like a pretty cut and dry sentence there. But it doesn't seem to flow within it. Now, a lot of people have actually used this sentence, and they call it, some people call it the anti-pastor verse. Don't become pastors because you're going to be judged even more strict, right? It's the anti-pastor verse. Or some people say, hey, you shouldn't actually teach people about Jesus because you don't know nothing, right? Or some people say all these different things about this verse, and they will take this verse out of the context. But it seems weird that it's in there because it's a little bit, it feels like the context goes a little wonky on the very next verses because there's no place in this chapter beyond that James talks about teachers. And there's no place before that he talks about teachers. And so it's a little bit weird. I have a friend of mine that also used to point to this verse, and he would point to this verse as one of the biggest contradictions in the whole Bible. He says, this is a big contradiction. This is a big thing. He's now a Christian, but he didn't used to be Christian. And he and I used to have these debates, and he would say, look, this is a contradiction right here, because here is James. And James is telling you should not become a teacher. You should not be going out there and teaching about Jesus. But then you have Jesus in Matthew 28 saying, therefore, go out and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. So he would look at me and he would say, which one do we follow? Do we follow Jesus or James's brother? Well, I'll tell you, if there's a fight between Jesus' words and James, Jesus' brother, I'm going with Jesus. But at the same time, I would tell you that there is no actual controversy. There is no contradiction there, even though it looks like there is. The reason why there is no contradiction is because context. Context is key here. And we start to get to know exactly what James is getting at when he talks about not everybody should become teachers. We start to get to know what he's talking about as we continue on and as we figure out what the context is, because he starts talking more and more about wisdom. And about wisdom, what he's saying is not everybody should be teachers when they aren't looking at wisdom from above, when they're using their own wisdom, not Jesus' wisdom, not God's wisdom. And we start to see that in the very next verse. We start to see as he starts talking about this, and it seems almost like a contradiction in itself, because he starts off and he says, look, not everybody should become teachers. And then he says this in verse 2, all of us, because all of us make mistakes. Well, all of us do make mistakes. Now, is that the prerequisite to be a teacher? Is not make any mistakes? Is that the prerequisite to be a pastor? To not make any mistakes? I will tell you, if it is, I am failing. And I have failed because I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And then he continues on, and he says, but if a person never makes a mistake in what he says, he is perfect and is also able to control his whole being. That mistakes now become of the mouth. That it is mistakes that he's talking about in words. Do preachers ever make mistakes while they're preaching? Absolutely. Do people make mistakes when they're talking about Jesus? Absolutely. Should you not tell people about Jesus because you might make a mistake? No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what James is saying. That's not what James is actually saying here and what he's getting at. But what he's getting at is something a little bit different. See, what James is really getting at, and the subtext that's behind here, is he's saying, look, not everybody should be the one that's actually drawing the lines in the sand, saying, follow this, and this is the way you go, because you're not actually getting that wisdom from God if you're getting it from yourself. We should not be following those lines in the sand drawn by people that aren't getting that from God. And in order to understand that, we have to know a little bit about the context. Context is key. We've got to know what was happening in that time. You see, if we remember when we talked about James chapter 1, see, James is writing this to a specific people. James is writing this to a specific people. I always wonder, if we were to look at these, this is a letter. This is a letter from James. It's an epistle. It's a letter that he's sending out to the churches. I always wonder if James knew that his letter was going to be read for all time as this is what you're supposed to do. I always wonder if Paul thought about, like, this is going to be read for all time as this is what you're going to do, if they would have changed some of the way that they've talked and some of the things that they put in. They probably would have. They probably would have said, oh, okay, well then I need to add more clarity. But they assumed that there was clarity in there. And here's what was going on at the time of James. See, James was in a society that was broken and it was troubled. We find out in the very first chapter, he's writing to the scattered tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. He's talking to the Jews and to the new Christians, and he's talking to the people, and he's saying, look, this is who we are. But he's at the same time in this empire where he's writing this in AD 45 or AD 60, around there. He's writing this in this time where all of a sudden things are going wonky. Things are hard. Things are difficult for James and the Christians and the Jews. There's more and more taxes that is being placed on them. Their taxes are actually becoming so preventative that Jews and Christians can no longer live. They're having to actually pay just to believe in God. They're having to pay a ton of money to be able to do that. And they're being pushed out from the cities and from the populations, and they're being pushed out and put into the poorer areas at the very, very backside of the sewers. They're in a struggle right now where the Roman Empire is starting to crush them, where people are having difficulty, more difficulty than ever. And they're scared and they're frustrated. And in the Roman Empire, there's difficulty happening there too. The empires, the emperors, they keep on struggling. They keep on having infighting, and they keep getting new ones after the last one kills the other one. And then you also had leaders that were also doing that. And if you get fired as a Roman leader, it's not like you get a pension and they say go home. Oftentimes you get beheaded or strung up or killed, or something horrible and horrific happens. So now there's new leaders that keep getting put into place within the Roman Empire. And these new leaders, every time that they come in, they want to show their strength, and they want to show how strong they are and how tough they are. And the very first people that they pick on is the Jews and the Christians. And now the Jews and the Christians, they're embattled and they're struggling. As James is writing this letter to them, they're struggling. Now here's the other thing, is the Jewish people and the Christian people at that time, they remember the thing called Maccabean Revolts. The Maccabean Revolts, the Maccabees. The Maccabees was over in 160 AD. So 160 AD, all of a sudden they still remember these revolts and these revolts that are happening. They remember these revolts that had happened a long time ago. That was when another society where the Greeks all of a sudden had taken over the Jewish temple, and they said, this is ours now. And for several years, the Maccabees fought against them, and they got back the temple. And they remember the revolts. And now, in this time, in this season of Rome, where things are going horrible and things are going wrong, and now all of a sudden the Jews and the Christians and everybody is being persecuted, now you've got a lot of leaders that are standing up, and they are saying, look, we should follow this way, we should follow this Jesus, we should also revolt. We should also revolt, and we should go against Rome. We should fight. We're going to fight against this. We're going to fight against this injustice, and we're going to revolt. And what's happening is a lot of these leaders, they're saying love, and they're talking about love, but they're also preaching hate. And they're saying, look, we need to kill these oppressors. We need to get rid of these oppressors. And we know this from a lot of different records, and different records not only from Rome, but we know some different writings and records that we've seen. And they're wanting to revolt. And that's the background of what is happening in James. That many people are now speaking against the people that are near them. And they're trying to close ranks, and say, we only need to be this people, our small people. Let's keep our ranks small. Let's not go out. Yes, we're going to love each other, but let's hate the rest of the world. Let's do this. And now all of a sudden, it's sparking fires. And James, in his letter, he talks about this. And he says, look, that words can actually spark fires. They can ignite ships. They can steer the ships in the wrong directions. They could do a lot of harm. And all of this is happening during James's time. It's the background of James's time. It's the background from which we see this. In James 3:7-9, we humans are able to tame the tongue, or we humans are able to tame and have tamed other animals and creatures and birds and reptiles and fish, but no one has ever tamed the tongue. That no one can ever tame the tongue. And James is talking about this to a people at that time. He's saying, look, not everyone should be teachers. Not everyone should be the people that are drawing those lines, because you're not getting that wisdom from God. You're getting it from you. And we have a problem in that we all make mistakes, and no one can tame the tongue. That no one can do that. If you remember, even in the verses before, James was actually talking about, look, the person who can actually tame the tongue, the person who can actually do everything that he's saying, and everything is going to be perfect. But then he also tells us right here that no one can actually do that. That no one can do it. It sounds like we don't have very much hope, do we? We don't have very much hope. Like, what can we do? Now imagine if you're in that time, and you're hearing this. Well, then what can we do, James? And he continues to make it even worse. He says this, it is evil and uncontrollable. It is full of deadly poison. We use it to give thanks to our Lord and Father, and also to curse other people who are created in the likeness of God. That here we are, and we're using it to speak love and to say Jesus, but at the same time we're cursing the other people that are also made in the likeness of God, the people that we're supposed to be attracting. Now imagine if you're in that time. If you're in that time and you're being persecuted and you're being hurt and you're being shoved out of your places of living, and you're having to pay more taxes and you're having to do this, are you all of a sudden going to go, man, I feel like loving all the people around me? No, they're frustrated. They're irritated. They're going, what is going on? And there was a lot of people in that day that are now saying, okay, look, we want to revolt. And they're speaking love, but at the same time they're showing hate. And they're doing the opposite. They're doing the opposite of things. Now think about it in our time. Think about translating this into our time. In our time, do we do that too? I would tell you that there is a lot of similarities between James's time and our time. There's a lot of similarities between that. Where today there is more persecution that is happening. I would say it's not always happening here in America. We have persecution in a different kind of a way, in kind of an underbelly kind of a way, in kind of a different kind of a way. But we don't have people that are being dragged out in the streets by their ears and their heads cut off in the middle of the streets. We don't have people on the evening news. In other countries today, they do. They have that going on everywhere. That is something that is actually still happening. It's something that continues to happen. But we also do have some persecution here. We do actually have a world that is very similar to James. In James's world, his whole world was saying, we hate you Jews, we hate you Christians, we hate you people. In our world, we often have the same thing. The world saying, we don't like you, we hate you, we hate you, we hate everything that you stand for. There's a lot of similarities that go back and forth. So what do we do with those similarities? Do we go and preach love and speak love and then act like love and act like Christians? Or do we do what people were doing in that time of James and say, look, we love you and we want to be with you and we want to speak Jesus to you, but actually we kind of hate you and we don't like you either because you hate us and, well, we don't like you. Are we speaking love? Are we speaking hate? There's a lot of different things. And I would say not everybody gets it right. And James tells us not everybody gets it right because nobody is perfect. And he tells us that nobody is perfect. He tells us that we all make mistakes. He tells us that no one has been able to tame the tongue, that nobody can be totally perfect. So what hope do we have? How do we change it? How do we figure it out? How do we do all this? How did James's time, how did they figure it out? If nobody has this ability, then what do we do? Give us the answers here, James. And then he says this in James 3:14-18. And he gets to the heart of the message that he's speaking at that time. He says this, but if in your heart you are jealous, bitter, selfish, Don't sin against the truth by boasting your wisdom. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven. It belongs to the world and is unspiritual and demonic. Where there is jealousy and selfishness, there is also disorder of every kind of evil. But the wisdom, and this is where he gets to the heart, the wisdom from above is first of all peaceful, pure, gentle, friendly, full of compassion, and produces a harvest of good deeds. It is free from prejudice and hypocrisy. It produces purity. It is free from prejudice and hypocrisy. It is peaceful, gentle, friendly, full of compassion. And goodness is the harvest that is produced from the seeds the peacemakers plant in peace. That goodness is produced. That if we want to see goodness produced and goodness produced around us and the good things in society and society changing and things changing, goodness is produced from the seeds the peacemakers plant, from the seeds that the people that are following Jesus and Jesus' wisdom, the seeds that they are planting in peace. That's a hard thing to give in that time. Imagine James giving this message at a time when all the public was going, we want to revolt. We're going to revolt. We're going to take on the empire. We're going to do this. Imagine giving this message, how hard that message would have been. I'm asking you to be peaceful. I'm asking you to show peace and wisdom. I'm asking you to not use your human wisdom. I'm asking you to use your godly wisdom. I'm asking you to follow God, to be peacemakers, and to go out there and love the people and do what he says. That would be really hard. He was asking people to show love, not hate, to be different than what the rest of the world was showing. And I will tell you, history was not on their side. History was not on their side. You see, from this all, what we see is wisdom comes from above. It comes from above. It does not come from us. That oftentimes we become like those chickens and we start looking at that line, right? We start looking at that line that's in front of us and we start to get blinded by it. We're like, okay, I'm going to follow this. I'm going to follow this line that's in front of us, this line that's there. But we don't see what God's trying to do to the right or to the left of us. We don't see what's going on in front. All we see is going on in front of us. That was what was happening in James's time. They only saw what was happening in front of them, but they didn't see what God's trying to do over here, and that God is trying to do something. And I will tell you that in that time, as history, and we look at history, that time they did not listen to James's words. Because right after this was written and passed out and thrown around in AD 67, there was a revolt. They stood up and they had a revolt, which led into a massacre of Christians and Jews that was huge. In AD 68, another revolt. In AD 69, another revolt. And in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed as retribution for all the revolts. The temple gets destroyed, and now people are even more displaced, and they are now hurting even more, and they are thrown into hiding, and they are no longer able to be out in public. The whole Roman Empire basically declared war against Christians and Jews. Said, that's it. We're done. No more revolts. So what happened? Well, here's the thing. The fascinating thing that happens with history, and as history comes, is I would say that Jesus actually predicted this, that Jesus knew this was going to happen. But at the same time, had they actually had followed Jesus' words and they had done what Jesus was asking them to do and to lead through peace and to lead through love, maybe things would have been different. But it wasn't that. But here's what ends up happening. How do we know about Christianity today? A lot of people actually ask me this. A lot of people will come to me and they'll say, okay, how do we know about Christianity today? I mean, if you think about it, how astronomical is it that all of a sudden we know about a carpenter that was a lowly carpenter that was killed on the cross when tons of other people were killed on the cross. Tons of other people were killed and massacred and were killed for their beliefs. There was tons of other people claiming to be Messiah. They were claiming to be different things. There was tons of people that were killed. How do we know about a carpenter, a lowly carpenter who was killed on a cross in Rome? How do we know about that? Especially when the Roman Empire decided we're going to declare war on Christians and Jews. How do we know about that when they were trying to stamp that out? How do we know about Christianity when Christianity was just a small, tiny snippet of people where there was barely anybody that understood or knew who God was and was following him? And the Romans, they did everything they could to try to stamp even that out. How do we know about all of this? Well, here's how we know. Here's the things, is when the temple was destroyed, the Christians and Jews went into hiding. But when they went into hiding, that was actually when they started to excel and they started to find a different pathway. They started to figure out, okay, we should actually probably follow what God is asking us to do. We should probably figure this out. And I would tell you how we know about Christianity today and why it became a worldwide religion, how we know about it and why we know about it is because of three things. One, because it's true, because truth wins out, because truth continues on. So one, because it's true. Number two is this, because it is God directed. I would tell you that everything throughout history shows the phenomenon of Christianity continuing to move forward, and it only moves forward because God is directing. And the way that God is directing, I would tell you that it is an insurmountable, and when you look at the statistics and you look at all of that, it is crazy. It is crazy that people today would even know Christianity. But I would tell you guys this, three. Number three is because those people decided we're going to follow what God was asking us to do. We're going to follow what James is asking us to do. And instead of, say, cursing everybody around here, speaking love and saying, hey, Jesus, we love Jesus and we love each other, instead of just doing that and then not doing anything with it, we're actually going to say it and we're going to do it and we're going to actually love our neighbors. And we're going to love the people that are with us and we're going to become peacemakers and we're going to become those people that are actually following God. We're going to be those people that instead of drawing the line in the sand and only focusing on our own issues and our own things, we're instead going to draw a line in the sand and say, God, direct this line. God, show me where the line is. God, move this line or change this line or build this line. But God, you draw the line in the sand because I want to follow it and I want to focus on you. And once people started to do that, and they started to just solely focus on God and say, we're going to follow God. We're going to even eat with the people that we don't like. We're going to follow God. We're going to love our neighbors, even the ones that we don't agree with. We're going to follow God. Once they did that, all of a sudden, more and more people started to know who Jesus was. And they started to get to know who Jesus was, who God was, and they started to believe. And they started to see that there was something different about Christianity. There was something different about Jesus, something that would last. That's why we know about Christianity today. Because there was people that said, I'm going to draw the line for God. I'm going to follow that line for God. I'm not going to see anything else except for what I'm following for God. We cannot be a people today, as we translate it into our own time, we cannot be a people today that speaks love of Jesus, yet shows hate or speaks hate. It becomes a duality. In that time of James, that was what was happening. They were speaking love and they were saying things that sounded great, but they also weren't showing it. They wanted to revolt. They wanted to have action. They wanted to get rid of their misery, and I totally get that. I probably would be in the same thing. I'm a fighter. I love to fight. I'm missing 2 teeth in the back of my mouth because I used to be a boxer. Not a good one, which is why I'm missing 2 teeth in the back of my mouth. I love to fight, but I will tell you, it takes everything in me to not want to fight and to become a peacemaker instead and say, Jesus, can you guide me to where you want me to be? Jesus, help me to know the right path forward. Jesus, help me to become where your vision is. Help me to lead people in that direction. I will tell you, switching gears just a little bit here, just in this last week alone and last couple weeks and months and so forth, I've had a lot of people that have come up to me and they've asked me this one big question. It's always this one big question. Why don't I talk about politics in church? Why don't I do politics? Why won't I do politics and mention politics? There's a lot of issues today. There's a lot of things happening today. There's a lot of things that are happening today in this world, and that politics is there. And I've had a lot of people, I will tell you, I've had a ton of people that ask me to come up and they say, would you support a candidate? Would you support this bill? Would you not support this bill? Would you do this? Would you do that? There's a lot of people that want to see the politics in there. And I will tell you that Jesus does work through politics and Jesus does work through everything. But I would tell you, I made a decision a long time ago not to talk about politics. And no, this is probably the last time you'll hear me talk about politics. So I'm literally telling you I don't talk about politics while talking about politics. Okay, so but here's why I don't talk about politics in the day. See, I've realized a long time ago that especially here in Washington, especially here in Kitsap County, we are more polarized as a people than we've ever been. We are polarized as a people. We have things that divide us everywhere. There is everything that you do, everything you say on Facebook, anything that you say to anybody else, people will divide over that. We are divided in our politics. We are divided in our opinions. We are divided in controversial subjects. Even some of the most controversial subjects that are out there, like if Five Guys burger is better than In-N-Out burger, which I will tell you it is. Absolutely. I'm not a fan of In-N-Out. Now, I could tell you, I just said my opinion, and some of you are hating me a little bit. And that's why I don't talk about politics. Because one of the things that I found out a long time ago was this. When I used to actually talk about issues of the day into politics and things like that, what I figured out was that no matter where I was, no matter when I was, no matter where I was, there was always somebody there who heard that message, even if I was speaking it in love, even if I was talking about something in a loving way, somebody there would always hear it as hate. Even if they agreed with my political opinion, even if they agreed with something, but because I wasn't talking about the gospel, but I was talking about something that was political and something that was in the mainstream, they would see it as hate. They would see it as something wrong. And it led people to do one of two things. One thing is it led people, when people agreed with the opinions and they were like, yeah, those are the opinions, it led them to want to hate people that were of the opposite opinion. And it led people of the opposite opinion to now hate me. And in doing that, they also started to dislike the gospel that I was preaching, because all they heard was a political message instead of the Jesus message. And it took me a long time to figure out that I was actually drawing this line, and I was drawing my own lines, my own worldview, my own thing, but I wasn't drawing the line to where God was actually calling me. A long time ago, I started praying. And I was praying and I was saying, God, where do you want me to go? Who do you want me to go after? Where is it that you want me to be? And I will tell you this, that verse in James 3 became sort of my mantra. But wisdom from above is pure, first of all. It is also peaceful, gentle, and friendly. It is full of compassion. It produces a harvest of good deeds. And it is free from prejudice and hypocrisy. And as I started to look at that, and I started to look at James, and I started to think through that, and then I started to make a decision, and it's my own personal decision, and I will tell you this, it is my own personal decision, but my decision is I will never talk about politics in church, except for this one time. But I will never talk about politics in church, because God didn't call me to just go after the people that already agree with me. He called me to go after all people. To all people that are there, people that I disagree with, people that don't agree with me. And I will tell you, there's people that come up to me and they say, well, what, you don't like politics? You don't like politics at all? No, I love politics. Actually, I used to want to be a politician. I used to want to change the world by being Senator Jeremy or something like that. Thank God I didn't. But I will tell you this, that I actually do love politics, and I do have opinions. And people say, hey, what, you don't have any opinions? Well, no, I do have opinions. Ask my wife. I've got opinions for days, right? I just don't tell them because they're always right, and people get offended. But I would tell you, I made a decision a long time ago to say, wait a minute, I can give my opinion or I can talk about Jesus. And here's what I found, is I used to spend a lot of time talking about my opinion and talking about different opinions and different ways forward, and I was drawing that line and I was saying, hey, this is the line and you can either be over here or you can be over here. But what I found out when I was doing that is that my opinion never changed anybody, but the gospel did. And so I focus on the gospel. And that's what James is telling all of the people in James chapter 3 as well. Focus on the right thing. Focus on the right things. Focus on, instead of, and as the band comes up, but focus on, instead of just all the lines that we see in front of us and the lines that we set in front of us, the lines that we're drawing in front of us, focus on the line that God calls you to draw, that God is leading. Because here's the thing, when we rely on human wisdom, when we're relying on our own human wisdom and our own human likes and all the things that we agree with and all that, when we only rely on that, oftentimes we get blinded by this line that's right in front of us. We don't see what God's trying to do over here and over here. But if we're going to God and we're going to him daily and saying, God, would you guide my wisdom? God, would you guide my vision? Would you draw this line in front of me? God, would you be the line drawer? Because I need your wisdom, not my wisdom. When we do that, we see things different. And we're able to see the people and the things that God is trying to do to the left and to the right of us. Now, I will tell you this. I'm not telling you guys not to have opinions and not to have politics and not to have anything like that. That is my own personal decision, and that was something that I made with God. I'm not telling you guys not to have an opinions and not to draw lines in politics and all of that stuff. Absolutely. I'm telling you this. Draw those lines with God and not your own worldview. If God calls you to draw those lines and it becomes a political thing and it becomes something where, hey, this is the stance that I'm at, absolutely. And if you've prayed about it and you have said, God, this is where I'm going to be, then absolutely go for it. We'll tell you this, God does use politics. He uses politicians. He uses different things within our nation. He uses different things to work. Absolutely. I will tell you, that's just not my way. That's just not my way, because my way is solely on the gospel, pointing people to the gospel no matter what. Because here's the thing, when we focus on that line and we make that line about God and wisdom from Him, we can start to see more than just that line. We can start to see the things that are around us and the things that God is actually trying to do and doing here in our kingdom or in His kingdom right here in front of us. That was the problem that was happening in James. They couldn't see what was going on to the right or to the left of them, and they were so focused on the one thing, let's revolt, let's go after them, let's go do this. But they weren't seeing that God was actually calling them to be loving and to be peacemakers. And had they done that, maybe they would have actually figured out, hey, more people are coming to know who Jesus is. I would tell you that's the same of today. If you ever want to know an example on how to do that, if you ever want to know an example on what that looks like, look at Jesus. Jesus did it. See, Jesus didn't refuse to sit and eat with and talk with people that He disagreed with. No, He ate with Sadducees and Pharisees, the very same people that would actually put Him to death. The very same people that wanted to kill Him, He would still eat with them. They would have conversations. They would have disagreements. We can still have conversations. We can have disagreements, absolutely. But we keep the main thing, which is of God. And that's what Jesus did always. He sat down and He ate with the people that He disagreed with. And they kept it about God. This is where God is. He sat down and He ate with the Samaritans, the people that the Jews hated above everything. They hated the Samaritans, yet He sat down with them. He ate with them. He even stayed days with them. And He said, I'm still going to love you. He talked with people that were Gentiles. He ate with people that were Gentiles. He spent time. He healed people that were Gentiles. He healed Roman soldiers. He was there even talking to Roman soldiers. Think about this. The very same people that were oppressing, He was still with them and loving them. What do we do for the people that are around us, people that we might disagree with, people that we may not like, people that may be somebody that we're like, well, I don't know about them. They're just not my same opinion. They're still not my same people. They're not my type. Are we still saying, I want to be like Jesus? Or are we pushing them off? Because when we do that, I'll tell you, they view that as hate. They view that as everything we talk about love isn't actually loving. So my challenge for you today is one big thing. My challenge for you today is this. My challenge for you today is to look at the lines that you're drawing in life. I'm not telling you not to draw lines in the sand. I'm not telling you not to have lines. Absolutely. But what I am telling you is take a look at those lines that we've drawn and that we follow, and look at those lines and figure out, is God drawing that line for me? Am I following God? Is God actually directing that line? And if He's not, ask God, God, how do I draw this line for you? Would you draw this line? Ask God, say, God, I want to follow you in everything that I'm doing. Would you draw this line before me, because I need your wisdom? Our wisdom's flawed. Our wisdom's flawed, but God's is not. His is the one that leads to peace and purity and love and friendliness. Ask God, how can I draw that line with you and for you so that I can follow it towards you, and that other people around me will see the vision of you too? Ask Him that today.